A janitor with no formal training designs a system in secret. His bosses ignore him until one day, the company discovers his idea has saved them $40 million. How did a simple napkin change everything? Before we dive into this incredible true story, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that brilliance can come from anywhere. The unseen genius. The fluorescent lights of Drexel Manufacturing buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the endless factory hallways. It was 4:45 a.m., and the building stood quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of wheels rolling across polished linoleum. Carlos Mendez, a 58-year-old janitor with callous hands and a quiet demeanor, pushed his cleaning cart toward the cafeteria. He had done the same routine for 12 years, 5 nights a week, 10 hours a shift. Most people never noticed him, and that was fine. He wasn't the kind of man who needed attention. But Carlos noticed everything, especially the waste. Every morning, he emptied the cafeteria trash bins, and every morning, they were overflowing not with food, but with perfectly clean and used napkins. Workers would grab thick stacks during lunch, use 1 or 2, and toss the rest. Hundreds of them, every single day. It was a small thing, maybe, but small things added up. Carlos had always been good with his hands. Back in Puerto Rico, he had fixed radios, rebuilt engines, even jury-rigged a broken air conditioner with nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. He wasn't formally educated, but he understood mechanics. And this was a problem he could fix. One night, during his break, he pulled a napkin from the dispenser and studied it. The problem wasn't the napkins. It was the dispenser. Too easy to grab too many. Too easy to waste. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stubby pencil. On the back of the napkin, he sketched a rough design, a small metal guide, a tension spring, a way to release one napkin at a time. Simple, effective, but who would listen to a janitor? The next morning, as dawn crept to the high factory windows, Carlos hesitated outside his supervisor's office. Dan Porter, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl, sat behind a desk, flipping through paperwork. He had never been cruel to Carlos, but he had never seen him either. To Dan, Carlos was part of the building, like the lights or the floors. Functional. Invisible. Carlos took a deep breath and knocked. Dan barely glanced up. "Yeah, Mr. Porter, I have an idea." Carlos unfolded the napkin sketch and placed it on the desk. "The cafeteria waste? I think I can fix it." Dan frowned at the drawing, then at Carlos. "You're kidding." "No, sir. If we adjusted dispensers, we could save thousands in supplies." A beat of silence. Then Dan snorted. "You're a janitor, Mendez. You clean, you don't design." He flicked the napkin aside. "Stick to what you're paid for." The word stung, but Carlos didn't flinch. He picked up the crumpled sketch. "Just thought I'd try." Dan was already back to his paperwork. "Close the door on your way out." Carlos walked back to his cart, the napkin clenched in his fist. For a moment, he considered tossing it. Maybe Dan was right. Maybe he should just keep his head down. But then, he passed the cafeteria again. A worker reached the napkin dispenser, pulled out a thick wad, used one, and let the rest fall into the trash. Carlos's jaw tightened. No, this wasn't over. That night, in his cramped garage, Carlos dug through a box of old hardware. Springs, screws, scrap metal. His wife, Rosa, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" "Fixing something," he muttered. She watched as he bent a metal bracket, tested the tension. "You're going to get in trouble." Carlos didn't answer. He just kept working. Because sometimes, the only way to prove you're right is to show them. And he would. The secret experiment. The garage light flickered as Carlos tightened the last screw on his prototype. It wasn't pretty, a mix of scrap metal, a tension spring from an old screen door, and a plastic cover he'd salvaged from a broken printer. But it worked. He tested it again, sliding a stack of napkins into the modified holder. With a soft click, only one napkin released at a time. Rosa sighed from the doorway. "Carlos, if they catch you." They won't. He wiped grease from his hands. I'll put it in the cafeteria tomorrow. Just one, just to see. She gave him that look. The one that said, I know I can't stop you, but I'm going to worry anyway. But she didn't argue. She never did. The next morning, Carlos arrived early, his prototype hidden in a janitorial supply bag. The factory was still dark, the machine silent. His heart pounded as he approached the cafeteria. If security caught him tampering with company property, he'd be fired on the spot. But no one came. With quick hands, he swapped out one of the regular dispensers for his modified version. It fit perfectly. He stepped back, examining his work. To anyone else, it looked like just another napkin holder. Now came the real test. Lunchtime, Carlos pretended to mop near the cafeteria doors, watching as workers filed in. His stomach twisted as the first employee, a young guy from the assembly line, reached for the dispenser. Click. One napkin. The guy frowned, shook the dispenser, then tried again. Click. Another single napkin. He muttered something under his breath, but walked away, using only what he needed. Carlos exhaled. It worked. Over the next hour, he watched as dozens of employees encountered the mysterious dispenser. Some tugged harder, frustrated. Others simply took the one napkin and moved on. But by the end of lunch, something remarkable happened. The trash bin beneath it was only half as full as the others. A small victory, but a victory all the same. For a week, Carlos monitored the dispenser in secret. Every night, he emptied the trash, comparing the weights. Every day, the savings added up. He scribbled calculations on the back of a work order, extrapolating the numbers to the entire facility, then to all of Drexen's locations nationwide. The results stunned him. If every cafeteria used his design, the company could save millions. But before he could celebrate, disaster struck. Linda Carter, the VP of Operations, was known for her sharp eyes. She noticed everything, from misplaced inventory to inefficient workflows. And on Friday afternoon, she noticed the odd napkin dispenser. Carlos was refilling the soap in the restroom when his radio crackled. Maintenance to the executive wing. Now, his blood ran cold. When he arrived, Linda stood in the hallway, arms crossed. Beside her, Dan Porter looked like he'd just won the lottery. This yours. Linda held up the prototype. Carlos swallowed. There was no lying his way out of this. Yes, ma'am. Dan smirked. Told you he was wasting company time. Linda ignored him. Explain. So Carlos did. He told her about the waste, the calculations, the potential savings. He expected to be fired on the spot. Instead, Linda studied the dispenser, turning it over in her hands. Then she did something Carlos never saw coming. She smiled. Come to my office Monday morning, she said. Bring your numbers. Dan's face darkened. You can't be serious. That's enough, Dan. Linda's tone left no room for argument. As Carlos walked away, he realized two things. First, he wasn't fired. Second, this was far from over. The $40 million meeting. The elevator door slid open with a quiet ding, revealing the plush executive floor of Drexen Manufacturing. Carlos Mendez stood frozen for a moment, his reflection staring back at him from the polished brass doors. A janitor in a freshly pressed but ill-fitting suit, his work boots swapped for the single pair of dress shoes he owned, bought 15 years ago for his son's confirmation. The shoes pinched his toes, but the discomfort was nothing compared to the knot in his stomach. Linda Carter had told him to come prepared. So he had. His right hand clutched a worn manila folder containing 3 weeks' worth of data, handwritten notes on scrap paper, coffee-stained napkin calculations, and printouts from the library computer he'd paid 25 cents per page to use. In his left hand, he carried the 4th iteration of his prototype, now sanded smooth and spray-painted corporate gray. The receptionist at the mahogany desk glanced up, her manicured fingers pausing over her keyboard. Can I help you? Carlos opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Linda's voice cut through the lobby. He's with me. The VP of Operations stood in the doorway of the conference room, her sharp bob perfectly framing an unreadable expression. Behind her, through the glass walls, Carlos could see a dozen executives already seated around the long table. At the head sat Robert Drexen himself, the company founder's grandson, scrolling through his phone with bored disinterest. Carlos's throat went dry. Linda lowered her voice as he approached. "Remember, just the facts. No emotion." She hesitated, then added, "And whatever happens, don't look at Dan." That's when Carlos noticed his supervisor lurking near the coffee station, face flushed an unhealthy shade of red. The room fell silent as Carlos entered. A junior executive snickered behind his hand. Robert Drexen finally looked up, blinking as if surprised to see a janitor in his boardroom. Linda cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, this is Carlos Mendez from Facilities. He's identified a significant cost-saving opportunity one believes warrants your attention." Dan Porter made a derisive noise into his coffee cup. Carlos set his prototype on the table with a quiet click. The executives leaned forward, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. For 12 years, Carlos had been invisible in this company. Today, he made them see. He began with the trash. Every day, Drexen's 5,000 employees waste approximately 37 tons of paper products, Carlos said, his voice gaining strength as he distributed his hand-drawn charts. 72% is in used napkins. My solution reduces that waste by 91%. A balding man in a $3,000 suit frowned. "You want us to police napkin usage?" "No, sir." Carlos demonstrated the prototype. "The dispenser does it for us." Click. One napkin. Click. Another. The CFO's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "What's the ROI?" Carlos flipped to a dog-eared page in his folder. Initial rollout to all facilities would cost $287,000. Annual savings project at $40 million after implementation. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Robert Drexen sat up straight. Dan Porter chose that moment to strike. "With all due respect," he said, the phrase dripping with venom, "this is a janitor playing engineer on company time. Those numbers are fantasy." Linda opened her mouth to counter, but Carlos was already moving. From his folder, he produced 7 garbage bags, each labeled with a date and location. "These are from last week. Cafeteria A used my prototype. B through G didn't." He appended the bags onto the conference table. Used napkins spilled across polished mahogany. The difference was staggering. 1 modest pile versus 6 mountains of waste. The room erupted. "Those are our profit margins literally being thrown away," the CFO exclaimed. Robert Drexen stared at Carlos with new intensity. "How long have you worked here, Mr. Mendez?" 12 years, sir." "And in all that time, no one noticed this?" Carlos met his CEO's gaze. People see what they expect to see. A heavy silence fell. Dan Porter looked ready to spontaneously combust. Then Robert Drexen did something no one anticipated. He laughed. "Well, gentlemen," he said, picking up the prototype, "it appears we've been outsmarted by the most observant man in the company." He turned to Carlos. "How soon can you have these in every facility?" Dan's chair screeched as he stood. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Drexen cut in. He extended a hand to Carlos. "Congratulations. You just saved this company $40 million. As their hands shook, Carlos caught Linda's subtle nod and Dan's purple-faced glare. The battle was won. The war was just beginning. The ripple effect. The morning sun streamed to the windows of Carlos Mendez's new office, casting long golden rectangles across the freshly installed nameplate on his desk. Director of Efficiency Innovation. It had been 6 months since the boardroom meeting. 6 months since a janitor's idea had rewritten his future. The office was modest, but is a far cry from supply closets and mop buckets. On the wall hung a framed napkin, his original sketch preserved under glass. Beneath it, a plaque. "Great ideas can come from anywhere, even from where you least expect." Robert Drexen. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Miguel, his 20-year-old son, stood in the doorway holding 2 coffee cups, his grin wide enough to split his face. "You seeing this, Poppy?" He gestured to bustling open workspace outside, where a team of engineers worked on refining Carlos's designs. All this because of a napkin. Carlos took the coffee, warmth spreading through his fingers. All this because someone finally looked. Miguel shook his head, marveling. They're calling you the $40 million janitor in the break rooms, you know. Carlos chuckled. The nickname had stuck faster than the new dispensers. Over 3,000 units had already been installed across Drexen's facilities, with projections hitting all locations by year's end. The savings were even greater than he'd estimated, $42.3 million and counting. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was a shift. The factory floor buzzed as Carlos walked the assembly line, nodding to workers who now called him by name. Where once they barely glanced up from their tasks, now they smiled. Some even stopped him with ideas of their own. A tool adjustment here, a process tweak there. The culture had cracked open, and innovation was seeping through. Near Station 12, he spotted Dan Porter arguing with a floor manager. Their voices carried over the hum of machinery. Absurd to change protocols based on some janitors. Dan cut himself off as he noticed Carlos approaching. His jaw clenched, but something in his posture had changed. The bluster was thinner now, papered over with reluctant respect. Carlos extended a hand. "Morning, Dan." A pause. Then Dan shook it. "Mendez." "No, Carlos." "No, Mr. Director." But it was progress. That evening, Carlos sat at his kitchen table, Rosa sliding a plate of Eras con gandals in front of him. The television played a local news segment about his story, another surprise Drexen's PR team had arranged. An ordinary man whose extraordinary observation skills transformed corporate waste management. Rosa squeezed his shoulder. "You hungry, hero?" Carlos covered her hand with his, calluses brushing against familiar warmth. "Just tired." But it was a good tired, the kind that came from building something lasting. On the fridge, Miguel's community college acceptance letter hung beneath a magnet. Business Innovation Program. It read, his son had enrolled a week after Carlos's promotion. "I want to learn how to spot opportunities like you do, Poppy." Carlos took a bite of rice, savoring the flavors of home as the news played on. 12 years of invisibility. One moment of being seen. And now, everything was different. Before you go, if this story reminded you that big change often starts small, hit that like button. Who knows? The next world-changing idea might be hiding in your hands right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click that button to join our community of everyday innovators. Because the best stories aren't about extraordinary people. They're about ordinary people who dare to look at things differently. Turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring true story like Carlos's.